I found my will rewritten in my daughter-in-law's laptop. That night, she attacked me in court. The betrayal cut through my soul like a knife through warm butter. Today, I'm going to tell you something I never thought I would share. And if for even a second this feels familiar, I only ask that you like this video and subscribe. It will help me keep opening my heart. My name is Eleanor, and at 73 years old, I thought I knew what family meant. I thought I understood loyalty, love, and the sacred bonds that tie generations together. I was wrong. So devastatingly wrong that it nearly destroyed me. It was February in Queens, New York, when the cold seemed to seep through every crack in my small apartment on Astoria Boulevard. The radiator clanged like an angry ghost, and I wrapped my grandmother's quilt tighter around my shoulders as I sat at my little kitchen table, paying bills with shaking hands. The numbers never seemed to add up anymore. My Social Security check, my late husband Frank's modest pension, the few dollars I had saved from selling our house in Bayside after he passed, it all felt like sand slipping through my fingers. But I kept giving. I kept believing that love meant sacrifice, that being a mother, a grandmother, meant putting everyone else first until there was nothing left of yourself but an empty shell in a drafty apartment, waiting for phone calls that rarely came. The morning I discovered the laptop, I had been cleaning. My son Michael had left it behind after one of his increasingly rare visits, tucked behind the couch cushions like a forgotten afterthought. The screen was still warm when I found it, glowing softly in the dim afternoon light filtering through my small window. I almost didn't look. I should have minded my own business. But something, call it intuition, call it desperation, made me open it. The document was right there on the desktop. Eleanor Peterson Will Final Docs, it said, dated just 2 weeks ago. My heart hammered against my ribs as I double-clicked, thinking perhaps Michael was helping me organize my affairs. What a fool I was. The words on the screen made no sense at first. They couldn't be real. According to this document, this forgery with my name signed at the bottom in handwriting that looked almost like mine but wasn't quite right, I was leaving everything to my daughter-in-law Sandra. My savings, my life insurance policy, even the small investment portfolio Frank had built over 40 years of careful planning, everything I had worked for, everything I had sacrificed for, was going to a woman who barely looked at me during family dinners. My hands trembled as I scrolled through the pages. The language was cold, clinical, nothing like the warm words I had written in my real will, the one safely locked away in my bedroom dresser. This fake document erased my granddaughter Maya completely, the sweet child who still called me every week, who still remembered my birthday with hand-drawn cards. This version of my will gave everything to Sandra, with a small allowance for Michael to manage his mother's final affairs. I printed the document with my ancient printer, the machine wheezing and groaning as if it too was shocked by what it was producing. 23 pages of betrayal, still warm from the printer when I held them in my hands. I sat there in my kitchen, staring at those pages until the words blurred together through my tears. How long had they been planning this? How many conversations had they had behind my back, calculating my worth, counting down the days until I would be gone? The questions swirled in my mind like leaves in an autumn storm, each one cutting deeper than the last. I thought about all the times I had opened my wallet, my heart, my home to them. The $5,000 I gave Michael when he lost his job 3 years ago. The car payments I helped Sandra with when her credit was rejected. The countless babysitting hours. The Christmas gifts that stretched my budget thin. The groceries I bought when they came to visit because I wanted them to feel welcome, wanted, loved. I thought about the night Frank died. How I had called them from the hospital, my voice breaking as I told them their father was gone. Michael had cried on the phone, promised to be there for me, said we would get through this together. Sandra had whispered condolences in the background, her voice soft with what I thought was grief, but now realized might have been something else entirely. Relief, perhaps. Or calculation. The apartment felt smaller that day, the walls pressing in around me like a tomb. I made myself a cup of tea with hands that wouldn't stop shaking, spilling hot water on the counter, on my sweater, on the fake will pages spread across my kitchen table like evidence of a crime, which I supposed they were. I had always been the giver in my family. Even as a child during the Depression, sharing my school lunch with hungrier kids, even when Frank and I were newlyweds struggling to make ends meet, sending money to his mother in Pennsylvania every month. Frank used to joke that I would give away my last dollar if someone needed it more than I did. He thought it was beautiful, my generous heart. Now I wondered if it had been my downfall instead. The phone rang that evening, shrieking through the silence of my apartment like an accusation. Sandra's name appeared on the caller ID, and for a moment I considered not answering. But old habits die hard, and I picked up after the fourth ring. "Eleanor, hi." Sandra's voice was bright, cheerful, the same tone she used when she wanted something. I hope you don't mind, but Michael left his laptop at your place. I'm going to swing by and pick it up tomorrow, okay? My mouth felt dry as cotton. Of course, I managed to say, my voice sounding strange in my own ears. I'll have it ready for you. Thanks, you're the best, Sandra said, and I could almost see her practiced smile through the phone. Oh, and Eleanor? Don't worry about looking through it or anything. It's just boring work stuff. The line went dead, and I sat there holding the phone long after the dial tone began to buzz in my ear. Don't worry about looking through it. The words echoed in my mind like a warning I had received too late. I spent that night awake, pacing my small living room, my feet wearing a path in the thin carpet between the couch and the window. The city lights twinkled beyond the glass, millions of people going about their lives while mine fell apart in slow motion. I kept picking up the printed pages, reading through them again, hoping I had misunderstood, hoping it was some kind of mistake. But the document was thorough, professional. Someone had put real thought into this forgery, real effort. They had researched the legal language, formatted it correctly, even included witness signatures from people I didn't recognize. This wasn't a spur-of-the-moment decision or a moment of weakness. This was premeditated theft, planned and executed with the cold precision of a business transaction. By the time the sun rose over Queens, painting my apartment in shades of gold and orange, I had made a decision. I retrieved my real will from the locked drawer in my bedroom, the one Frank and I had written together with our lawyer 5 years ago. I read through it slowly, remembering the conversations we had about each provision, each gift, each expression of love we wanted to leave behind. In my real will, I had left the bulk of my assets to Michael, with generous provisions for Maya's college education and Sandra's future. I had included my jewelry for Maya, my mother's china for Sandra, even Frank's tools for Michael's son who was just learning carpentry. Every item had a story. Every bequest came from my heart. The fake will told a different story entirely. It painted me as a bitter old woman who favored her daughter-in-law over her own blood. It suggested that Michael was incompetent with money, that Maya was undeserving. Most painfully, it erased every personal touch, every loving gesture Frank and I had included to show our family how much they meant to us. I made copies of my real will that morning, storing them in different locations around my apartment. One copy went into my purse, another into a manila envelope taped under my kitchen table. I even scanned the pages and emailed them to myself, though I barely understood how to use the computer Frank had bought me before he got sick. When Sandra arrived to collect the laptop, I was ready for her. I had cleaned the printed pages away, closed the document, even cleared the browser history like Maya had taught me to do. I smiled when I opened the door. The same warm smile I had given her for 15 years of marriage to my son. "Come in, dear," I said, my voice steady despite the storm raging in my chest. "Would you like some coffee?" Sandra shook her head, her eyes already scanning my living room for the laptop. She found it quickly, tucked it under her arm like she was claiming treasure. "Thanks, Eleanor. Sorry Michael forgot it. You know how absent-minded he gets." I nodded, still smiling, still playing the role of the dotty old mother-in-law who didn't know any better. "Of course, dear, these things happen." She was halfway to the door when she paused, turned back to face me with an expression I couldn't quite read. For a moment, I thought she might confess, might break down and explain how desperation or greed had driven her to this betrayal. Instead, she smiled that perfect, cold smile and said, "You know, Eleanor, you should really think about updating your will. Frank's been gone for 3 years now. Things change." The words hit me like a physical blow, but I kept my expression neutral. "That's good advice, Sandra. I'll think about it." She left without another word, and I watched from my window as she climbed into her car, the laptop tucked safely beside her. My insurance policy for the future, she probably thought. My ticket to a comfortable life built on the bones of an old woman's trust. But Sandra had made one crucial mistake. She had underestimated me. She had assumed that because I was old, because I was alone, because I had always been generous to a fault, I would roll over and accept this betrayal without a fight. She had forgotten that I was Frank Peterson's wife, that I had survived the Depression, raised children during the Cold War, and buried the love of my life with dignity and strength. She had forgotten that sometimes the most dangerous person in the room is the one everyone underestimates. The next few days passed in a blur of phone calls and research. I contacted the lawyer who had written my real will, a kind man named Mr. Rodriguez who had handled Frank's estate. His voice was warm and reassuring when I explained the situation, though I could hear his shock at the audacity of what had been done to me. "Mrs. Peterson," he said carefully, "what you're describing is a serious crime. Forging a will is a felony in New York. Have you considered contacting the police?" I had considered it, spending sleepless nights weighing my options. But the thought of my son Michael in handcuffs, of Maya seeing her father arrested on the evening news made my stomach turn. Despite everything, despite the betrayal and the lies, they were still my family. I still loved them, even as they were trying to destroy me. I want to handle this carefully, I told Mr. Rodriguez. I want to give them a chance to make this right before we involve the authorities. He agreed to help me, to document everything and prepare a legal challenge if necessary. We scheduled a meeting for the following week, and I hung up the phone feeling something I hadn't felt in months. Hope. But that hope was tested almost immediately. Michael called that afternoon, his voice tight with what I now recognized as guilt disguised as irritation. Mom, Sandra said you were acting weird when she picked up my laptop. Is everything okay? I chose my words carefully, each one measured and deliberate. I'm fine, dear. Just thinking about the future, about making sure everything is in order. There was a pause, a silence that stretched long enough for me to hear my own heartbeat. What do you mean, in order? Well, my will, my finances. Sandra suggested I might want to make some updates, and she's probably right. Things do change. Another pause, longer this time. When Michael spoke again, his voice was different, sharper. Mom, you don't need to worry about any of that. We've got everything handled. We, not you, not I'll help you. We. As if my life, my future, my final wishes were already their property to manage. That's very thoughtful, dear, I said, my voice as sweet as honey over broken glass. But I think it's important for me to be involved in my own affairs. Don't you? I could almost hear him scrambling on the other end of the line, could picture him running his hands through his hair the way he had done as a child when he was caught in a lie. Of course, Mom. I just meant, we don't want you to stress about this stuff. You should be enjoying your retirement. Enjoying my retirement. In my drafty apartment, eating dinner alone every night, stretching my Social Security check to cover medications and groceries while they planned to steal everything I had worked for. The irony would have been funny if it hadn't been so heartbreaking. I appreciate your concern, Michael, but I think I'll schedule some meetings with professionals just to make sure everything is exactly the way I want it. The silence that followed was deafening. Finally, Michael cleared his throat. Okay, Mom, if that's what you want. But maybe Sandra and I should be there too? To help you understand the complicated stuff? To make sure I didn't expose their crime, he meant. To control the narrative. To manipulate any professionals I might consult. The thought made my stomach turn. That's sweet of you to offer, dear, but I think I can handle it. After all, I managed our family's finances for 45 years of marriage. I think I remember how it works. I hung up before he could respond, my hands shaking with a mixture of fury and sorrow. This was my son, the baby I had nursed through countless childhood illnesses, the boy I had cheered for at Little League games, the young man I had helped through college with every spare dollar we could find. This was the person who was now trying to steal my final years, to reduce me to a confused old woman who couldn't be trusted with her own decisions. The meeting with Mr. Rodriguez was both enlightening and devastating. He spread the fake will across his desk like evidence in a murder trial, pointing out the subtle differences in handwriting, the legal inconsistencies, the witness signatures that couldn't be verified. It was masterful fraud, he admitted, but fraud nonetheless. The question, he said, looking at me over his reading glasses, is what you want to do about it. We can challenge this document in court, expose the forgery, and pursue criminal charges. Or we can try to handle this privately. Give your family a chance to withdraw the fake will and return to your original wishes. I stared at the papers scattered across his desk, seeing not legal documents, but love letters that had been torn apart and rewritten by strangers. What would Frank do? I asked, more to myself than to Mr. Rodriguez. The lawyer smiled gently. From what you've told me about your husband, Mrs. Peterson, I think he would want what's best for you. And what's best for you is the truth. That night, I called a family meeting. My hands shook as I dialed Michael's number, then Sandra's, asking them to come to my apartment the next evening. I made it sound casual, like a dinner invitation, but there was something in my voice that must have worried them. They both agreed immediately, too quickly, with the kind of forced enthusiasm that comes from a guilty conscience. I spent the next day preparing, both mentally and practically. I cleaned my apartment, made a pot of Frank's favorite chili, even bought a bottle of wine. If this was going to be the last meal I shared with my family, I wanted it to be memorable. They arrived together, Michael carrying flowers from the bodega down the street, Sandra clutching a store-bought apple pie. Their smiles were too bright, their hugs too tight, and I could see the fear lurking in their eyes like shadows at dusk. We ate dinner with forced cheerfulness, discussing Maya's school performance, the weather, Anything but the elephant in the room that was slowly suffocating us all. Finally, when the dishes were cleared and we were sitting around my small coffee table with cups of decaf and slices of pie, I pulled out the manila envelope I had prepared. "I wanted to talk to you both about my will," I said quietly, my voice cutting through the artificial warmth like a blade through silk. Sandra's fork clattered against her plate. Michael's face went pale as winter snow. "Mom," he started, but I held up my hand to stop him. "I've been thinking about what Sandra said, about updating my documents, and I realized she was absolutely right. Things do change." I opened the envelope and pulled out the fake will, spreading it across the coffee table between us. I found this very interesting version of my wishes. The silence that followed was so complete I could hear the refrigerator humming in the kitchen, the distant sound of traffic on the street below. Sandra stared at the papers like they were written in a foreign language, while Michael's mouth opened and closed without making a sound. "I have to admit," I continued, my voice steady despite the earthquake happening in my chest, "I was impressed by the attention to detail. The legal language is quite sophisticated. The formatting is professional. Even the signature looks remarkably like mine." Sandra found her voice first, her words coming out in a rush of practiced innocence. "Eleanor, I don't understand what you're talking about. What is this?" I looked at her, really looked at her, seeing for the first time the calculation behind her carefully applied makeup, the coldness behind her concerned expression. "This is a forgery of my last will and testament, Sandra. A very good forgery, but a forgery nonetheless." Michael finally spoke, his voice cracking like a teenager's. "Mom, you're confused. This must be some kind of mistake." "The only mistake," I said, pulling out a copy of my real will and placing it beside the fake one, "was leaving your laptop where I could find it. And the second mistake was underestimating me." We sat there in tableau for what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes. The weight of exposed truth pressing down on us like a physical thing. Sandra's mask finally slipped, her face transforming from fake concern to something harder, more desperate. "You don't understand the pressure we're under," she said, her voice taking on a whining quality I had never heard before. "Michael's job is unstable. Maya needs money for college. We're drowning in debt. We thought you'd want to help us." "Help you?" The words came out louder than I intended. "Help you forge my will? Help you steal everything Frank and I worked for? Help you erase my granddaughter from her inheritance?" "Maya's just a kid," Sandra shot back, her composure completely gone now. "She doesn't need money. We have bills, real responsibilities." It was in that moment, listening to this woman dismiss my granddaughter as unworthy, that something inside me finally snapped. The part of me that had always bent, always given in, always put everyone else's needs before my own, died a quiet death in my living room that night. I stood up slowly, feeling every one of my 73 years in my aching joints, but also feeling something else. Strength I hadn't known I still possessed. "Get out," I said quietly. Michael jumped to his feet, his hands reaching toward me in supplication. "Mom, please, let's talk about this. We can work something out." "Get out of my home," I repeated, my voice growing stronger with each word. "Take your lies, your fake documents, and your betrayal, and get out." Sandra stood too, her face flushed with anger now instead of shame. "You're making a huge mistake, Eleanor. We're the only family you have left. You push us away, and you'll die alone in this miserable little apartment." The threat hung in the air between us like poison gas. And for a moment, the old me wavered. The old me that was terrified of abandonment, that would rather be used than be unwanted. But then I thought of Frank, of the 45 years we had built together, of the love and respect that had sustained us through every hardship. "I would rather die alone with my dignity," I said, walking to the door and opening it, "than live surrounded by people who see me as nothing more than a bank account with a heartbeat." They left without another word, Sandra grabbing her purse like she was fleeing a crime scene, Michael looking back over his shoulder with something that might have been regret or might have been calculation. I closed the door behind them and turned the deadbolt, the sound echoing through my apartment like a gunshot. Then I sat down on my couch and cried. I cried for the family I thought I had, for the love I thought was real, for the future I thought we would share. I cried until my eyes were swollen and my throat was raw, until there were no tears left in my body. But when I woke up the next morning, something had changed. For the first time in months, I had slept through the night without waking up anxious about money or phone calls or family obligations. The apartment felt different too, lighter somehow, as if a weight I hadn't realized I was carrying had been lifted from my shoulders. I made myself breakfast, real breakfast with eggs and toast and orange juice, not the instant oatmeal I usually grabbed on my way to run errands for other people. I sat at my kitchen table looking out at the city waking up beyond my window, and I felt something I hadn't felt since Frank died. Peace. The phone rang 3 times that day. Michael twice, Sandra once. I let them all go to voicemail, their voices becoming increasingly frantic as they realized I wasn't going to answer, wasn't going to play their game anymore. Mom, please pick up. Michael's voice pleaded from the answering machine. We need to talk about this. We can fix this. But I was done being fixed by people who had broken me in the first place. The next week, Mr. Rodriguez filed papers with the court challenging the validity of the forged will. The process was complicated, involving handwriting experts and document analysis, but the evidence was overwhelming. The fake will was exposed for what it was, a criminal attempt to steal my life's savings. The phone calls became more desperate then, shifting from pleading to threats to promises of reconciliation if I would just drop the legal proceedings. Sandra even showed up at my door one evening, her eyes red-rimmed with tears that I wasn't sure were real. "Eleanor, please," she sobbed through the intercom. "I made a mistake. I was desperate. Please don't destroy our family over this." I stood by the door listening to her cry, feeling the familiar tug of sympathy that had controlled me for so many years. But then I remembered her words about Maya, about how my granddaughter didn't deserve an inheritance, and my resolve hardened like steel. "You destroyed this family the moment you decided to steal from me," I said into the intercom. "I'm just making sure everyone knows the truth." The legal battle stretched on for months, an exhausting series of depositions and court appearances that drained my savings and my energy. But I persevered, supported by Mr. Rodriguez's steady guidance and my own growing sense of self-worth. I had forgotten what it felt like to fight for myself, to stand up for what I believed in, to refuse to be victimized. The strangest part was how few people seemed surprised by the revelation. Neighbors I had known for years nodded knowingly when they heard the story, as if they had been waiting for something like this to happen. Apparently, my family's treatment of me hadn't been as subtle as I had thought. "I always wondered about that daughter-in-law of yours," said Mrs. Chen from across the hall. "Something cold about her eyes, you know? Like she was always calculating something." Even my pharmacist, a sweet man who had filled Frank's prescriptions for years, shook his head sadly when I told him what had happened. "These young people," he said, "they think money is more important than family. They forget that respect can't be inherited." But the most painful discovery came from an unexpected source. Maya, my granddaughter, now 16 and old enough to understand the gravity of what had happened, called me one evening while her parents were out. "Grandma," her young voice was tight with anger and shame, "I heard them talking about the will thing. I just wanted you to know that I had nothing to do with it. And I think what they did is disgusting." I closed my eyes, feeling tears of relief and gratitude sliding down my cheeks. "Never thought you did, sweetheart. You're not like them." "I've been saving money from my part-time job," Maya continued, her words coming in a rush. "Whatever they were trying to steal from you, I want to help pay back. It's not much, but it's something. This child, this beautiful, honest child, was offering to sacrifice her own savings to repair the damage her parents had done. In that moment, I felt a surge of hope that had been missing from my life for months. "Keep your money, Maya," I said gently, "but thank you for offering. Thank you for being the person your grandfather would be proud of." The court case dragged on through the summer and into the fall. There were setbacks and victories, moments when I wondered if fighting was worth the stress and expense, and moments when I felt stronger than I had in years. The fake will was eventually declared null and void, my original will reinstated, and criminal charges were filed against Sandra for forgery and attempted fraud. She plea bargained down to probation and community service, avoiding jail time but carrying a criminal record that would follow her for years. Michael escaped formal charges, though the investigation revealed he had known about the scheme from the beginning. The day the judge signed the final order, I sat in the courthouse hallway holding Mr. Rodriguez's hand, feeling a mixture of triumph and profound sadness. Justice had been served, but at the cost of losing my family forever. The victory felt hollow, like winning a war by burning down your own house. "Justice isn't always satisfying, Mrs. Peterson," Mr. Rodriguez said gently, as if reading my thoughts. "But it's necessary. What they did to you was wrong, and wrong needs to have consequences." I nodded, understanding his words intellectually, but still struggling with the emotional reality of my situation. I had won the legal battle, but the war had cost me almost everything I valued. Almost everything, but not quite everything. Maya started visiting me regularly after the court case ended, taking the subway from her high school in Manhattan to my apartment in Queens every week. We would sit in my kitchen drinking tea and talking about her classes, her friends, her dreams for college and beyond. She was nothing like her parents, this girl who had inherited her grandfather's gentle humor and strong moral compass. "I've been thinking about changing my last name," she told me one afternoon, her young face serious with determination. I don't want to carry Dad's name anymore, knowing what he did to you. I reached across the table and took her hands in mine, these young hands that still held so much promise and possibility. Your name doesn't define who you are, sweetheart. Your actions do. You can honor your grandfather's memory and your own integrity, no matter what name you carry. She nodded thoughtfully, then smiled that same smile that had lit up my world since she was a baby. Grandma, I've been looking at colleges, and I found some programs that help kids pay for school through work study. I don't need a big inheritance or trust fund. I can make my own way. This child, who at 16 understood more about honor and self-reliance than her parents had learned in 40 years of life, was going to be just fine. Better than fine. She was going to be extraordinary. The seasons turned, winter giving way to spring, spring blooming into summer. My apartment slowly transformed from a place of mourning into something that felt like home again. I painted the walls a warm yellow that reminded me of sunshine, replaced the heavy curtains with light, airy panels that let the morning light flood in. I bought plants, lots of plants, filling my windowsills with green growing things that needed care and attention, but gave back beauty and life. I started volunteering at a senior center in Astoria, helping other elderly people navigate the complexities of Medicare and Social Security. It felt good to use my skills, to help people who were facing the same challenges I had faced, to make sure no one else felt as lost and abandoned as I had during those dark months. Many of the people I helped had similar stories: children who had disappeared once the inheritance was secure, grandchildren who only called when they needed money, families who treated their elderly members like burdens to be managed rather than treasures to be cherished. I found a community of survivors, people who had learned to value themselves even when their families wouldn't. The hardest lesson, said Margaret, an 80-year-old woman whose daughter had tried to have her declared incompetent so she could control her assets, is learning that sometimes the people who are supposed to love you the most are the ones who hurt you the deepest. We were sitting in the center's community room, a circle of gray-haired warriors sharing our war stories over coffee and store-bought cookies. Each story was different in its details, but similar in its themes: betrayal, theft, abandonment, and ultimately, survival. But the most important lesson, added Robert, whose son had forged his signature on a reverse mortgage, is that you can survive losing them. You think you can't, but you can. And sometimes, you're better off without them. I nodded, feeling the truth of his words settle into my bones like warmth from a long-awaited fire. I was better off. Lonelier, perhaps, but better off. I slept better, ate better, worried less. I had money to buy myself small luxuries, time to read books and watch movies, space to breathe without constantly calculating how much I could give away. The 1-year anniversary of discovering the fake will came and went without fanfare. I marked it quietly, privately, by taking myself out to dinner at a nice restaurant in Manhattan, something I never would have done while supporting my ungrateful family. I sat by the window watching the city lights twinkle like earthbound stars, felt something I hadn't experienced in years: contentment. Michael tried to contact me several times that year, usually around holidays or my birthday. His voicemails were carefully crafted mixtures of apology and manipulation, admitting some wrongdoing while trying to minimize the impact of what they had done. "Mom, I know we made mistakes," his voice would plead from my answering machine. "But we're still family. Maya misses you. I miss you. Can't we find a way to move past this?" But I had learned to recognize manipulation disguised as love, and I deleted his messages without responding. Maya had my phone number. If she missed me, she could call me herself, which she did, regularly, usually to tell me about her latest academic achievements or to share funny stories about her part-time job at a bookstore. Sandra never tried to contact me directly after the court case ended, but I heard through neighborhood gossip that she and Michael were having serious marital problems. Money troubles, according to Mrs. Chen, who still kept me updated on local drama whether I wanted to hear it or not. "Serves them right," she said with the satisfied air of someone who had predicted disaster from the beginning. "You can't build happiness on dishonesty. It always comes back to bite you." I tried to feel some satisfaction in their struggles, some sense that justice was being served beyond the courthouse. But mostly, I just felt tired. Tired of carrying anger. Tired of nursing wounds. Tired of letting their betrayal continue to define my days. The second spring after the court case brought unexpected news. Maya called with excitement bubbling in her voice, telling me she had been accepted to Columbia University with a partial scholarship. "I did it, Grandma," she said, her joy infectious even through the phone line. "I got in, and I can afford it without help from anyone." I felt pride swell in my chest like a balloon filled with warm air. This remarkable young woman had found her own way, had refused to be tainted by her parents' corruption, had chosen integrity over easy money. Frank would have been so proud. I want you to come to my graduation, Maya continued. I know Mom and Dad will be there, but I don't care. You're the most important person in my life, and I want you there. The thought of facing Michael and Sandra again made my stomach clench with anxiety, but the thought of missing Maya's graduation was worse. This girl had been a light in my darkness, a reminder that love could exist without conditions or calculations. I'll be there, I promised, and meant it. The graduation was held on a perfect June morning, the kind of day when New York City shows off its best side. Columbia's campus was crowded with families and flowers, caps and gowns, tears and laughter. I dressed carefully for the occasion, wearing a blue dress that Maya had complimented when I wore it to one of our tea dates, carrying a bouquet of sunflowers that reminded me of her bright spirit. I saw Michael and Sandra from across the courtyard before the ceremony began. They looked older, more worn than I remembered, stress etched in lines around their eyes and mouths. Sandra's designer handbag had been replaced by something cheaper, and Michael's suit looked like it had seen better days. The financial difficulties Mrs. Chen had mentioned were apparently real and ongoing. They saw me too, and for a moment, our eyes met across the crowd of celebrating families. Michael raised his hand in a tentative wave, his expression hopeful and uncertain. Sandra looked away quickly, her jaw tight with what might have been shame or anger or both. But I didn't have time to analyze their reactions because Maya appeared at my elbow, radiant in her cap and gown, her smile wide enough to light up the entire campus. "Grandma, you made it," she said, throwing her arms around me in a hug that smelled like youth and possibility and the faint scent of her vanilla perfume. I wouldn't have missed it for the world, I told her, meaning every word. We found seats near the front, Maya insisting I sit with her friends rather than with her parents. I watched my granddaughter walk across the stage to receive her diploma, watched her shake hands with the dean, watched her beam with accomplishment and joy. In that moment, surrounded by the hopes and dreams of hundreds of young people starting their adult lives, I felt something shift inside me. The bitterness that had lived in my chest for 2 years began to loosen, not disappearing entirely, but losing some of its sharp edges. After the ceremony, as families gathered for pictures and celebrations, Michael approached me with careful, measured steps. He looked nervous, uncertain, like a man walking through a minefield. "Mom," he said quietly, "thank you for coming. It means a lot to Maya." I looked at him, this man who had once been my baby boy, who had once run to me with skinned knees and broken toys, and felt a complicated mixture of love and disappointment. "I came for Maya," I said simply. "Not for you." He nodded, his shoulders sagging with what looked like genuine remorse. "I know, and I understand why. What I did, it was unforgivable." For a moment, I considered walking away, ending the conversation before it could become something messy and painful. But something in his voice, something that sounded like real regret rather than calculated manipulation, made me stay. "Yes," I agreed. "It was unforgivable. But Maya isn't responsible for your choices, and I won't let your mistakes cost me my relationship with her." "I'm glad," Michael said, and his voice cracked slightly. "She needs you in her life. She's always needed you more than she needed us." It was perhaps the most honest thing he had said to me in years. Sandra approached us then, her expression carefully neutral, her hands clasped in front of her like she was preparing for battle or surrender. "Eleanor," she said, my name sounding strange in her mouth after 2 years of silence. "I owe you an apology." I waited, saying nothing, forcing her to fill the silence with whatever truth or lies she had prepared. "What I did was wrong," she continued, her voice steady but quiet. "I was scared and desperate, and I made terrible choices. I cost our family everything important, and I'm sorry." The apology hung in the air between us, imperfect and incomplete, but possibly sincere. I studied Sandra's face, looking for signs of manipulation, for the calculation that had once hidden behind her smiles. Instead, I saw exhaustion and what might have been genuine shame. "Thank you for saying that," I said finally. "It doesn't change what happened, but it's a start." We stood there in awkward silence for a moment. 3 people who had once been family, who had shared holidays and birthdays and ordinary Tuesday dinners, now separated by a chasm of betrayal and broken trust. Maya appeared beside us, still glowing with graduation joy, apparently unaware of the tension crackling between the adults in her life. "Pictures," she announced, holding up her phone. "I want pictures with everyone." We pretended to be a normal family for those few minutes, arranging ourselves into smiling groups, Maya's happiness infectious enough to smooth over the sharp edges of our complicated history. In the photos, we looked like any other proud family celebrating a milestone. The camera couldn't capture the undercurrents of pain and regret that swirled beneath our forced smiles. After the pictures, After the hugs and congratulations and promises to stay in touch, I walked away from Columbia's campus feeling lighter than I had in 2 years. Not because I had forgiven them, forgiveness was still a distant possibility, if it was possible at all, but because I had proven to myself that I could face them without falling apart. I had looked my betrayers in the eye and remained whole. I had listened to their apologies without desperately accepting them or angrily rejecting them. I had been present for Maya without sacrificing my own dignity or safety. It felt like a victory of sorts, small but significant. The summer passed quietly, filled with long walks through Astoria Park, afternoon movies at the local theater, and regular phone calls with Maya as she prepared for college. I continued volunteering at the senior center, finding purpose in helping others navigate the bureaucratic maze of aging in America. One particularly hot August afternoon, as I was helping a new client fill out Medicare paperwork, she looked up at me with tired eyes and said, "How do you do it? How do you stay so positive when everything is hard and your family doesn't care?" I paused, pen in hand, considering her question. How did I do it? How had I survived the discovery of the forged will, the court battle, the loss of the family I thought I had? I learned that my worth isn't determined by other people's treatment of me, I said slowly, the words feeling true as I spoke them. I learned that being alone isn't the same as being lonely. And I learned that sometimes, the most loving thing you can do for someone is to stop enabling their bad behavior. She nodded thoughtfully, then smiled for the first time since I'd met her. Maybe there's hope for me too. There's always hope, I said, and realized I actually believed it. Fall arrived with its usual fanfare of changing leaves and crisp mornings. Maya started college, calling me weekly to share her adventures in dormitory living and advanced literature classes. She was thriving in her new environment, making friends and discovering interests I had never known she possessed. "I'm thinking about majoring in social work," she told me during one of our calls. "I want to help families stay together, help them communicate better, help them solve problems before they become big enough to destroy everyone." I smiled, hearing echoes of Frank's compassionate heart in her words. This girl was going to make a difference in the world. I was certain of it. "That sounds perfect for you," I told her. "You've always been good at seeing the best in people." "I learned that from you and Grandpa," she said simply, and I felt tears of pride and gratitude slide down my cheeks. October brought an unexpected phone call from Michael. His voice was tentative, careful, as if he was afraid I might hang up before he could say what he needed to say. "Mom, I know you probably don't want to hear from me," he began, "but I wanted to tell you that Sandra and I are getting divorced." I sank into my kitchen chair, feeling a complicated mixture of sadness and something that might have been relief. "I'm sorry to hear that, Michael." "Are you?" he asked, and there was genuine curiosity in his voice. "I know you never liked her much." I considered his question carefully. Had I disliked Sandra? Or had I simply seen something in her that I hadn't wanted to acknowledge? "I'm sorry for Maya's sake," I said finally. "And I'm sorry that your marriage had to end in such a painful way." "It wasn't just about the will thing," Michael said quickly, as if he needed me to understand. "Though that was part of it. We'd been having problems for years. Money problems, trust problems. What we did to you, it was the symptom, not the disease." I listened to him explain their marital troubles, their financial difficulties, their failure to communicate or support each other. It was a familiar story, one I had seen played out in many families over the years. People who loved each other, or thought they did, destroying that love through poor choices and broken promises. "Where will Maya live?" I asked, cutting through his explanations to the only part that really mattered to me. "With me, mostly," Michael said. "Sandra's moving back to Connecticut to live with her mother while she gets back on her feet. Maya can visit her on weekends and holidays." A thought occurred to me, one that surprised me with its clarity and certainty. If Maya ever needs a place to stay or just wants somewhere quiet to study, she's always welcome here. The silence on the other end of the line stretched long enough that I wondered if we had been disconnected. Finally, Michael spoke, his voice thick with emotion. "Thank you, Mom. That means more than I can say. It's for Maya," I clarified, not wanting him to think this was an olive branch extended to him. "It's always been for Maya." "I know," he said quietly, "and I'm grateful." We hung up without saying goodbye, but somehow the conversation felt complete. Not reconciled, not repaired, but complete. Maya spent Thanksgiving with me that year, just the two of us in my small apartment, sharing a turkey that was far too big for two people and talking about everything and nothing. She told me about her classes, her new friends, her excitement about her field of study. I told her stories about her grandfather, about the early days of our marriage when we were poor but happy, about the dreams we had shared for our family's future. I never understood why Mom and Dad were always so worried about money. Maya said as we cleared the dinner dishes. You and Grandpa were happy without being rich. Your grandfather and I were rich. I corrected her. We just measured our wealth differently. We were rich in love, in friendship, in shared purpose. The money was just a tool to help us take care of each other. She nodded thoughtfully, loading plates into my ancient dishwasher. I think Dad forgot that. I think he started thinking the money was the point instead of the tool. This girl, barely 18 years old, understood something that had taken me 73 years to fully grasp. Money wasn't love, and love couldn't be bought. The two were separate things, and confusing them led to nothing but heartbreak. Christmas came and went quietly. I sent Maya a box of presents at her dorm, received a beautiful hand-knitted scarf from her in return. Michael sent a card with a brief, careful message wishing me health and happiness. Sandra sent nothing, and I felt only relief at her absence from my life. The new year brought a letter that changed everything. It arrived on a Tuesday morning in January, delivered by a courier service rather than regular mail. The return address was from a law firm I didn't recognize, and my hands shook as I opened the envelope. Inside was a formal legal document, typed on expensive letterhead, with language that took me several readings to understand. It was essentially a confession. Sandra had written a detailed account of how she had forged my will, acknowledging that she had acted alone and that Michael, while aware of her actions, had not participated in the actual forgery. Attached to the confession was a check for $15,000, representing what she calculated as the legal fees and emotional damages she had caused me. The accompanying letter was handwritten in Sandra's careful script. Eleanor, I know this doesn't undo the harm I caused, but I wanted to try to make things right. The money comes from the sale of my jewelry and some stock options I had saved for retirement. It's not enough, but it's what I have. I hope someday you can forgive me. Not for my sake, but for Maya's. She deserves to have her whole family in her life. Sandra. I sat at my kitchen table reading the letter over and over, trying to process what it meant. It wasn't just an apology. It was restitution. Sandra had given up her own financial security to try to repair some of the damage she had done to mine. The cynic in me wondered if this was another manipulation, another calculated move designed to win back my trust. But the amount of money, the sacrifice it represented, suggested something else. This felt like genuine remorse backed up by meaningful action. I called Mr. Rodriguez to ask what I should do with the check. Could I legally accept it? Would it complicate the criminal case that was still winding its way through the courts? You can accept it, he told me, and it might actually help resolve the criminal matter. It shows genuine remorse and restitution, which judges appreciate, but the choice is entirely yours, Mrs. Peterson. I deposited the check the next day. Not because I needed the money, but because refusing it would have been another form of punishment, and I was tired of carrying anger like a stone in my chest. The confession letter had another effect, too. It freed Michael from the shadow of uncertainty that had hung over him since the will forgery was discovered. While he had known about Sandra's plan, he hadn't actively participated in the fraudulent document. The letter made that clear, offering him a path back to some kind of redemption. He called me that evening, his voice thick with tears I couldn't see but could hear clearly. Mom, I don't know what to say. I know Sandra's letter doesn't erase what I did, what I allowed to happen, but I want you to know that watching her write it, watching her give up everything to try to make things right, it reminded me of who I used to be, who I want to be again. I listened to him cry over the phone, this man who had once been my little boy, and felt something shift in the region around my heart. Not forgiveness exactly, but something softer than anger. I'm glad she did the right thing, I said carefully, and I'm glad you supported her in doing it. I want to do better, Mom. I want to be better. I know I can't undo what happened, but I want to try to earn back some small part of your trust. Trust was a luxury I wasn't ready to offer, but hope was still within my budget. That will take time, Michael. A lot of time. I have time, he said simply. And I have patience. And I have a daughter who loves her grandmother very much and wants her family to be whole again. Maya called later that night, her voice bright with excitement and relief. Grandma, did Dad tell you about Sandra's letter? Isn't it wonderful? Now maybe we can all be a family again. Her optimism was touching and heartbreaking in equal measure. At 18, she still believed that love could conquer all, that good intentions could erase bad actions, that families could be repaired like broken toys with enough patience and glue. It's a good start, I told her, not wanting to dim her enthusiasm, but not wanting to promise more than I could deliver. Time will tell what it all means. Spring came early that year, arriving in March with warm sunshine and budding trees that made even Queens look beautiful. I found myself taking longer walks, sitting on benches in Astoria Park watching children play while their parents chatted nearby. The simple scenes of ordinary family life that had once made me feel excluded now just made me feel peaceful. I was content with my quiet life, my volunteer work, my weekly phone calls with Maya. I had learned to be alone without being lonely, to fill my days with purpose that didn't depend on other people's approval or gratitude. It was, I realized, the first time in my adult life that I had lived entirely for myself. Maya's first year of college ended with excellent grades and exciting plans for summer internships. She called to tell me she had been accepted into a program working with at-risk families in the Bronx, helping children navigate the foster care system. "I want to make sure kids don't get lost the way some adults do," she said, and I knew she was thinking about our family's struggles. "I want to help people communicate before the problems get too big to fix." Her compassion amazed me. This child who had witnessed her family nearly destroy itself, but had emerged with her empathy intact. Michael's attempts to rebuild our relationship continued slowly, carefully. He sent cards on appropriate occasions, brief texts asking about my health, updates about his work and Maya's activities. Nothing dramatic, nothing demanding a response, just small gestures acknowledging that I still existed in his world. I responded occasionally, brief, polite messages that acknowledged his efforts without committing to anything more. Summer brought a surprise visitor. Sandra knocked on my apartment door on a humid July afternoon, looking nervous and uncomfortable in a simple sundress that was far removed from the designer clothes she had once worn. I almost didn't answer the door when I saw her through the peephole, but curiosity won over caution. "Eleanor," she said when I opened the door, "I know I'm probably the last person you want to see, but I was hoping we could talk." She looked different, older and somehow smaller than I remembered. The confident woman who had once intimidated me with her sharp fashion sense and sharper tongue had been replaced by someone who looked worn down by life and consequences. Against my better judgment, I invited her in. We sat in my living room drinking iced tea, two women who had once been family, now separated by betrayal and broken trust. Sandra's hands shook slightly as she held her glass, and I noticed she was wearing a simple wedding band instead of the elaborate engagement ring she had once flashed so proudly. "I wanted to thank you for accepting the restitution check," she began, her voice quiet and careful. "And I wanted to apologize in person, face to face, for what I did to you." I waited for her to continue, offering neither forgiveness nor condemnation. "I was desperate," Sandra said, her voice cracking slightly. "Michael's business was failing. We were behind on the mortgage. Maya's college expenses were looming. I felt like I was drowning, and I made terrible choices. There were other options," I said quietly. "You could have asked for help. You could have been honest about your problems." Sandra nodded, tears starting to slide down her cheeks. "I know. I was too proud to ask, too ashamed to admit we were failing. And I convinced myself that you wouldn't miss the money, that you'd want us to have it anyway when you were gone. So you decided to speed up the process." "I never wanted you to die," Sandra said quickly, her voice rising in denial. I wanted to know we'd be okay when that day came. I wanted security for Maya, for Michael." I studied her face, looking for signs of deception, but saw only exhaustion and regret. "And you thought stealing from me was the way to provide that security?" I wasn't thinking clearly. I was scared and desperate, and I made the worst possible choice. Sandra set down her glass with hands that shook noticeably. "I lost everything because of that choice. My marriage, my home, my relationship with Maya, my self-respect. Everything." We sat in silence for several minutes, the weight of her confession settling between us like dust after an explosion. "What happens now?" I asked finally. "I don't know," Sandra admitted. "I'm living with my mother in Connecticut, working at a retail job that pays barely enough to survive. The criminal case will probably result in probation, community service. My credit is ruined. My reputation is destroyed. I may never recover financially from what I did." It should have felt like justice, hearing about her downfall, her suffering. Instead, I felt only sadness for the waste of it all. The waste of trust, of relationships, of years that could have been spent building something positive instead of destroying what already existed. "I'm sorry it came to this," I said, and meant it. Sandra looked up at me in surprise, as if she hadn't expected sympathy from the woman she had betrayed. "Are you? After everything I put you through?" I considered her question, searching my heart for the truth. "I'm sorry that you were so unhappy that you thought stealing was your only option. I'm sorry that your marriage ended in such a painful way. I'm sorry that Maya had to watch her family fall apart. I'm sorry that we all lost so much time to anger and mistrust. But you're not sorry that I'm facing consequences for what I did." "No," I agreed. "I'm not sorry about that. Actions have consequences, and you're learning that the hard way. But I take no pleasure in your suffering, Sandra. Revenge isn't as satisfying as I thought it would be." She nodded slowly, seeming to understand the distinction I was making. Is there any chance, she asked hesitantly, that we could ever not be friends exactly, but maybe not be enemies? I looked at this woman who had once been my daughter-in-law, who had shared holidays and birthdays with my family, who had given me my beautiful granddaughter. The anger that had sustained me through the legal battles and sleepless nights was still there, but it had cooled into something more manageable. I don't know, I said honestly. Time will tell, but I appreciate you coming here, facing me directly instead of hiding behind lawyers and intermediaries. Sandra finished her iced tea and prepared to leave, moving carefully as if she was afraid of breaking something else. Eleanor, she said as I walked her to the door, Maya talks about you all the time. How proud she is of you. How much she loves you. She's the best thing I ever did. And a lot of who she is comes from you and Frank. Thank you for being such a good influence in her life. After Sandra left, I sat in my quiet apartment thinking about forgiveness and justice, about consequences and redemption. The conversation had been difficult but necessary, like setting a broken bone that has to be rebroken before it can heal properly. I called Maya that evening to tell her about Sandra's visit. I'm glad she apologized in person, Maya said thoughtfully, and I'm glad you listened to her. I know what she did was terrible, but she's still my mom. I want to believe she can be better. She might be, I agreed. People can change if they really want to and they're willing to do the work. Do you think Dad can change too? It was the question that had been hovering between us for months. Unspoken, but always present. I think your father is trying to change, I said carefully. Whether he succeeds will depend on his actions, not his words. Maya seemed satisfied with that answer, and we moved on to discussing her summer internship, her plans for sophomore year, the young man she had started dating who sounded like a decent kid from a good family. As I hung up the phone, I realized that something had shifted during Sandra's visit. Not forgiveness exactly, but a release of the burning anger that had been consuming so much of my energy. I felt lighter, more at peace, as if I had set down a heavy suitcase I hadn't realized I was still carrying. The rest of the summer passed quietly. My volunteer work at the senior center continued to be fulfilling, introducing me to new people and new challenges every week. I started taking a watercolor painting class at the local community college, discovering a talent I never knew I possessed. My small apartment gradually filled with amateur paintings of flowers and landscapes, bright splashes of color that reflected my increasingly optimistic mood. Maya visited me several times during her internship, stopping by after long days working with troubled families in the Bronx. She would collapse on my couch, exhausted but exhilarated, and tell me stories about the children she was helping, the families she was trying to keep together. It's hard work, she admitted during one of these visits, but it's so rewarding when you see a family find their way back to each other. I made her dinner and listened to her stories, marveling at this young woman who had chosen to dedicate her life to healing rather than harboring resentment. She could have become bitter about her own family's troubles, could have decided that all relationships were doomed to betrayal and disappointment. Instead, she had chosen hope and service. Fall arrived with its usual blaze of changing leaves and crisp morning air. Maya returned to Columbia for her sophomore year, while Michael continued his careful campaign to rebuild our relationship. His messages became slightly longer, more personal, sharing details about his work, his new apartment, his efforts to build a life independent of Sandra's influence. I found myself responding more frequently, sharing small details about my own life, my volunteer work, my painting class. Nothing dramatic or emotionally charged, just the ordinary communications that form the foundation of any relationship. One October evening, as I was cleaning up after dinner, the phone rang with Michael's number on the caller ID. I almost didn't answer. We usually communicated through text messages, but something made me pick up. Mom. His voice was tight with distress. Maya called me from the hospital. She's okay, but she was in a car accident. I'm driving to New York now, but I thought you should know. My world tilted sideways. Maya in the hospital. Maya hurt. Maya needing help while I sat in my apartment painting watercolor roses and feeling sorry for myself about family drama that suddenly seemed petty and meaningless. Which hospital? I asked, already reaching for my purse and keys. Columbia Presbyterian. She says it's not serious, just some bruises, and they want to observe her overnight for a possible concussion. I was out the door before he finished the sentence, flagging down a taxi on Astoria Boulevard and giving the driver the hospital address in a voice that brooked no argument about speed or traffic laws. The emergency room at Columbia Presbyterian was a chaos of bright lights, hurried conversations, and the distinctive hospital smell of disinfectant and fear. I found Maya in a bed behind a blue curtain, looking small and young in a hospital gown, with a bandage on her forehead and bruises already purpling along her left arm. Grandma, she said, her face lighting up despite the obvious discomfort. You didn't have to come. I'm fine, really. I took her hand carefully, checking for injuries, reassuring myself that she was indeed alive and relatively whole. Of course I came, I said, settling into the uncomfortable chair beside her bed. Where else would I be? We talked quietly while we waited for the doctor to complete her evaluation, Maya telling me about the accident. A drunk driver running a red light, her car spun around but not destroyed, everyone involved walking away with minor injuries. I listened with half my attention while the other half catalogued her movements, her coherent speech, her clear eyes, all the signs that my granddaughter was going to be fine. Michael arrived an hour later, looking haggard and frightened, still wearing his work clothes and carrying a bouquet of flowers from the hospital gift shop. He rushed to Maya's bedside, his eyes scanning her face with the fierce attention of a parent confronting their worst nightmare. How are you feeling, sweetheart? Do you need anything? Should I call the doctor? Maya laughed softly, wincing at the movement. Dad, I'm okay. Grandma's been taking good care of me. Michael looked at me for the first time since entering the room, and I saw something in his eyes I hadn't seen in years. Genuine gratitude. Thank you for being here, Mom. Thank you for getting here so fast. I nodded, not trusting my voice to remain steady if I tried to speak. The three of us spent the night in that hospital room, taking turns dozing in uncomfortable chairs, while Maya slept fitfully under observation. It wasn't a pleasant experience, but it was strangely healing. For the first time in years, we were united in a common purpose, taking care of someone we all loved. In the early morning hours when Maya was sleeping and the hospital had settled into its pre-dawn quiet, Michael and I found ourselves alone together for the first time since the will forgery had been discovered. She could have been killed, he said quietly, his voice thick with the terror that every parent carries just beneath the surface. But she wasn't, I replied, watching Maya's chest rise and fall with steady, healthy breathing. When I got that call, when I heard she was in the hospital, Michael's voice trailed off, but I knew what he meant. The instant reordering of priorities that happens when someone you love is in danger, the sudden understanding of what really matters. It puts things in perspective, I agreed. We sat in silence for a while, two people who had hurt each other deeply, but who shared the same fierce love for the young woman sleeping in the hospital bed. Mom, Michael said finally, I know I have no right to ask this, but I need you to know that if anything had happened to Maya tonight, if we had lost her, the last few years would have been the biggest regret of my life. I looked at him, this middle-aged man with worry lines etched deep around his eyes, and saw echoes of the little boy who used to run to me when he was hurt or scared. Nothing happened to her, I said softly. She's going to be fine. But we're not fine, are we? Our family isn't fine, and I don't know how to fix it. The question hung in the air between us, heavy with years of hurt and misunderstanding. I don't know either, I admitted, but maybe we don't need to fix everything all at once. Maybe we just need to start with not making things worse. Michael nodded slowly, as if considering the wisdom in small steps and modest goals. Maya was released from the hospital the next afternoon with a clean bill of health and instructions to rest for a few days. She insisted on going back to her dorm rather than staying with either Michael or me, claiming she felt fine and didn't want to miss any more classes than necessary. But for the first time in years, Michael and I coordinated our care for her, texting each other updates when we called her, making sure she had everything she needed without overwhelming her with attention. It was a small thing, barely worth noticing, but it felt like progress. The incident seemed to shift something in all of us. Maya became more intentional about maintaining relationships with both Michael and me, refusing to let us remain safely separated by geography and old grievances. Michael became more direct in his communications, less careful and calculated, as if the fear of losing Maya had burned away some of his self-protective defenses. And I found myself more willing to respond to his overtures, more open to the possibility that time and genuine effort might heal some of what had been broken. Thanksgiving that year was different. Maya announced that she wanted to spend it with both her grandmother and her father, and that she didn't plan to take no for an answer from either of us. We don't have to be best friends, she said during one of our weekly phone calls, but we can be civil adults who eat turkey together for my sake. It was emotional blackmail of the gentlest kind, and we both knew it. It was also impossible to resist. Michael offered to host the dinner in his new apartment in Brooklyn, a small one-bedroom place that was a far cry from the suburban house he and Sandra had shared during their marriage. I arrived with homemade cranberry sauce and deep reservations, prepared to endure a few hours of polite conversation for Maya's sake. Instead, I found myself enjoying the afternoon. Michael had clearly put considerable effort into the meal, and his apartment, while small, was clean and comfortable. More importantly, he seemed genuinely relaxed in a way I hadn't seen in years, as if the end of his marriage had lifted a weight he hadn't realized he was carrying. Maya was radiant, glowing with satisfaction at having orchestrated this family reunion. She moved between her father and me with easy affection, clearly delighted that we were all in the same room without anyone yelling or walking out. The conversation was careful at first, limited to safe topics like Maya's school, the weather, and current events. But as the afternoon wore on and the wine relaxed everyone's defenses, we found ourselves talking about more personal things. Michael's new job, his therapy sessions, his efforts to understand where his marriage had gone wrong, my volunteer work, my painting classes, the small satisfactions of my quiet life. We even talked about Frank, sharing memories of holidays past, of traditions he had started and jokes he used to tell. For the first time in years, his absence felt like a shared loss rather than a private grief. As I prepared to leave that evening, Michael helped me with my coat and walked me to the door. "Thank you for coming, Mom," he said, his voice sincere without being overly emotional. "I know it wasn't easy." "It was easier than I expected," I admitted, surprised by my own honesty. "Maybe we could do it again sometime. Not necessarily a holiday, just dinner. When Maya's around, of course." I considered his suggestion, weighing my continued wariness against Maya's obvious happiness at seeing her family together. "Maybe," I said, which was more of a yes than either of us had expected. Winter settled over New York with its usual mixture of beauty and hardship. My apartment stayed warm thanks to a new heating system the landlord had finally installed, and I found myself looking forward to the quiet evenings when I could paint or read without the pressure of social obligations. Maya came to visit me during her winter break, spending 2 weeks alternating between my apartment and Michael's, filling both our lives with her energy and laughter. She helped me organize my paintings, suggesting I enter some pieces in a local art show for amateur artists. She also helped Michael redecorate his apartment, adding touches of warmth and color to what had been a distinctly masculine and somewhat sterile space. Watching her navigate between us with such natural grace, I was struck by how much she had matured in the past year. The girl who had once been caught between her parents' drama and her grandmother's hurt had become a young woman capable of building bridges and healing wounds. "You know what I've learned from all this family stuff?" she said one evening as we sat in my kitchen sharing tea and leftover Christmas cookies. "What's that?" "Love isn't something you can lose by giving it away. The more you share it, the more you have." I looked at this wise young woman, my granddaughter, who understood things at 19 that had taken me decades to learn, and felt a surge of pride and hope for the future. Spring returned to New York City with its annual promise of renewal and fresh starts. The trees lining the streets of Queens burst into bloom, painting my neighborhood in shades of pink and white that reminded me why I had fallen in love with this city decades ago. I was walking home from my painting class on a warm April afternoon when I encountered Sandra coming out of the subway station. She looked tired, but less fragile than she had during her visit to my apartment the previous summer. Her clothes were simple but clean, and she carried herself with what might have been the beginning of recovered dignity. We saw each other at the same moment, and for an instant I considered crossing the street to avoid the awkwardness of an unexpected encounter. But something, curiosity perhaps, or the kind of resigned courage that comes from having survived worse things, made me continue on my course. "Eleanor," Sandra said as our paths converged at the corner. "How are you?" "I'm well," I replied, studying her face for signs of the desperation that had driven her to forge my will. Instead, I saw someone who looked tired but stable, like a person who had hit bottom and was slowly climbing back up. "You look good," she said, and seemed to mean it. "Healthy. Happy. Thank you. How are you doing?" Sandra's smile was rueful but genuine, better than I was. Not where I want to be yet, but better. "I'm working 2 jobs now, saving money, trying to rebuild my credit. It's slow going, but it's honest work." We walked together for a block, 2 women who had once been family, now careful strangers navigating the aftermath of betrayal and forgiveness. "Maya tells me you've been painting," Sandra said. "That's wonderful. You always seemed like someone who had hidden talents waiting to be discovered." I was surprised by the compliment and by the lack of resentment in my chest when she offered it. "It's been good for me," I admitted. "Gives me something to focus on besides old hurts." Sandra nodded thoughtfully. "I've been thinking about taking some classes myself, maybe learning a skill that could lead to better work." Maya suggested computer programming, said there are programs for career changers. The conversation felt surreal, this normal discussion about classes and careers between 2 people who had been enemies just months before. But there was something peaceful about it too, as if we were both acknowledging that life continued beyond our conflicts. "That sounds like a smart plan," I said, and meant it. We parted ways at the next corner, Sandra turning toward the bus stop while I continued toward my apartment, As I walked, I reflected on how much everything had changed in the past 3 years. The woman who had discovered the forged will, who had felt so betrayed and abandoned, would never have believed she could have a civil conversation with Sandra on a street corner in Queens. But people change, circumstances change, and sometimes even the deepest wounds can heal if we let them. Summer brought a surprise that changed everything once again. Maya called me on a Thursday morning, her voice breathless with excitement and news that took my breath away. "Grandma, I have amazing news. I got accepted to study abroad next semester. A program in Ireland working with families affected by generational trauma. It's exactly what I want to do with my career." I felt simultaneously proud of her achievement and sad at the thought of her being so far away. "That's wonderful, sweetheart. When do you leave?" "August," she said, and I could hear her smile through the phone. But here's the best part. The program includes a family visit component where they bring over family members to see the work we're doing and understand its impact. I can invite 2 people, and I want to invite you and Dad. The idea of traveling to Ireland, of seeing Maya in her element doing work that mattered to her, was thrilling. But the prospect of spending a week in a foreign country with Michael, of navigating whatever progress we had made in close quarters, was daunting. "You don't have to decide right now," Maya continued, as if reading my thoughts. "Think about it, but I really hope you'll both say yes. This is important to me, and I want to share it with the people I love most." By evening, I had made my decision. Fear of awkwardness was no match for love of my granddaughter and curiosity about the work she was doing. I called Maya back and told her yes. I would love to come to Ireland. "Did Dad say yes too?" I asked. "He said he needed to think about it," Maya admitted. "I think he's worried about whether you'd be comfortable spending that much time together." It was thoughtful of him to be concerned, I realized. The old Michael, the one who had participated in forging my will, wouldn't have considered my comfort at all. "Tell him I said yes first," I told Maya. "That might make his decision easier." Michael called me the next day, his voice careful and uncertain. "Mom, Maya told me you agreed to go to Ireland. I wanted to make sure you were really okay with us both being there before I gave her my answer." "I'm okay with it," I said, and realized I actually was. "Maya wants us both there, and this is about her, not about us." "Okay then," Michael said, and I could hear relief in his voice. "Let's go to Ireland." The months leading up to the trip were filled with planning and preparation. Maya sent us reading lists about Irish history and the peace process, about trauma recovery and family systems therapy. She was clearly passionate about her work and wanted us to understand its context and importance. Michael and I found ourselves coordinating our travel arrangements, sharing information about flights and hotels, consulting about what to pack for September weather in Dublin. The conversations were practical and friendly, focused on logistics rather than emotions, but they represented a level of cooperation we hadn't achieved in years. The night before our departure, I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, wondering what the week would bring. Would seeing Maya in her professional element help Michael and me find our way back to something resembling a normal relationship? Would being in a foreign country, away from the familiar triggers and painful memories of home, allow us to see each other more clearly? Or would the forced proximity and shared stress of travel expose how little progress we had actually made? I fell asleep without answers, but with a sense of anticipation that felt more hopeful than anxious. The flight to Dublin was long but comfortable, made easier by Michael's thoughtfulness in upgrading our seats and his willingness to handle the logistics of international travel. We sat together on the plane, reading the same books Maya had recommended, occasionally sharing observations or asking questions about what we were learning. It felt almost normal, like the kind of trip a mother and son might take together without any underlying drama or unresolved trauma. Almost. Maya met us at the airport, radiant with excitement and pride, eager to show us the country she had fallen in love with over the past month. She looked different somehow, more confident and purposeful, as if the work she was doing had helped her grow into herself in new ways. "Welcome to Ireland," she said, throwing her arms around both of us in a 3-way hug that felt natural and right. "I have so much to show you." The week that followed was unlike anything I had expected. We toured historical sites and learned about the centuries of conflict that had shaped Irish society. We visited community centers where Maya and her fellow students were working with families still healing from the trauma of the Troubles. We met grandmothers who had lost sons, mothers who had raised children in the shadow of violence, young people who were determined to build a different kind of future. The work Maya was doing was clearly meaningful, both to her and to the families she was helping. She facilitated support groups, organized intergenerational conversations, helped people find ways to talk about pain that had been carried in silence for decades. Watching her work, I was struck by how naturally she drew on lessons from our own family's struggles. She understood betrayal and forgiveness, loss and reconciliation, in ways that made her uniquely effective at helping others navigate similar challenges. "You see how she uses her own experiences?" asked Dr. O'Brien, the professor who supervised Maya's program, during one of our conversations. "She doesn't hide from the pain in her own family history. She transforms it into empathy and insight that helps others heal." Michael and I spent hours talking that week, walking through Dublin's historic streets, sitting in pubs nursing pints of Guinness, exploring castle ruins and coastal villages. The conversations ranged from practical matters about Maya's education to deeper discussions about our own family's journey from betrayal to tentative reconciliation. "I never understood what the money represented to you," Michael admitted one evening as we watched the sunset over Galway Bay. "I thought it was just numbers in an account, something you wouldn't miss because you weren't spending it anyway." "It represented security," I told him, trying to find words for feelings that had taken me years to understand. "After your father died, money was the only thing that made me feel safe, that made me feel like I wouldn't become a burden on anyone else." "But you were never a burden, Mom. You've always given more than you received." I looked at this man, my son, who was finally old enough to understand the fears that had shaped so much of my behavior. "I know that now," I said, "but I didn't know it then. Fear makes people do strange things, makes them hoard love and money and forgiveness as if there's only a limited supply of each. Is that what I did too? Hoard security because I was afraid of not having enough?" It was a perceptive question, one that spoke to growth and self-awareness I hadn't expected from him. "I think maybe we all did," I said gently. "Your father and I hoarded money because we remembered being poor. You and Sandra hoarded it because you were afraid of becoming poor. Maya doesn't hoard anything because she's learned that love and security come from relationships, not bank accounts." We sat in comfortable silence, watching fishing boats return to harbor, feeling the peace that comes from understanding finally breaking through years of hurt and confusion. On our last night in Ireland, Maya organized a dinner at a small restaurant overlooking Dublin's River Liffey. The three of us sat around a table laden with traditional Irish food, toasting her success and our unexpected week of family harmony. "I have something to tell you both," Maya said, her eyes bright with excitement and what might have been tears. "I've decided to extend my program here for the full year. The work is too important to cut short, and I'm learning so much." My heart sank a little at the thought of her being so far away for so long, but I was also proud of her commitment to work that mattered. "That's wonderful, sweetheart," I said, meaning it despite my personal disappointment. "I think it's perfect," Michael added. "You're doing exactly what you should be doing at your age, following your passion and making a difference." Maya reached across the table and took both our hands in hers. "I couldn't do this without knowing that you two are okay with each other," she said seriously. "I couldn't be here so far away if I was worried about my family falling apart while I was gone, but this week has shown me that you're both strong, both capable of taking care of yourselves and each other when necessary." Looking at our hands joined together on the table, young hands and middle-aged hands and elderly hands, 3 generations connected by love that had survived betrayal and forgiveness, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years. Complete peace with my family situation. We weren't perfect. We probably never would be. But we were real, and we were trying, and sometimes that's enough. The flight home was quieter than the flight over, all of us processing what we had experienced and learned. Michael and I talked less but seemed more comfortable with each other, as if some essential barrier had been dissolved by the week of shared experience. As our plane descended toward JFK Airport, I looked out the window at the lights of New York spread out below us and felt genuine excitement about returning home. My quiet apartment, my painting classes, my volunteer work, all of it seemed more precious for having been missed. "Thank you for coming with me, Mom," Michael said as we waited for our baggage. "I know it wasn't easy, and I'm grateful you were willing to try." "Thank you for asking," I replied. "And thank you for being the kind of father who raises a daughter like Maya." It was perhaps the kindest thing I had said to him in years, and I could see the impact of the words in his face. Life settled into a new routine after Ireland. Maya and I talked weekly via video chat, her face glowing with the satisfaction of meaningful work as she told me about her projects and the families she was helping. Michael and I maintained contact too, not the careful, formal communications of the past few years, but genuine conversations about our lives, our work, our shared concern for Maya's well-being. The holidays that year were different again. Maya couldn't come home for Christmas, but she arranged for a 3-way video call on Christmas morning, opening presents while we watched from our respective apartments. It wasn't the same as being together, but it was warm and loving and real. Michael invited me to spend New Year's Eve with him, not romantically, but as family, watching the ball drop in Times Square on television while sharing Chinese takeout. and remembering Frank's tradition of making resolutions he never intended to keep. "What's your resolution this year, Mom?" Michael asked as midnight approached. I thought about it. Considering the changes of the past few years, the growth that had come from surviving betrayal and choosing forgiveness over resentment. "To keep painting," I said finally. "To keep volunteering. To keep being open to whatever comes next." "Those are good resolutions," Michael said. "Mine is to keep being someone Maya can be proud of, someone you can eventually trust again." "You're already someone Maya is proud of," I told him. "And trust. Trust is something that gets rebuilt one day at a time." Spring brought Maya home for a visit, her first time back in New York since leaving for Ireland. She looked radiant, more confident than ever, full of stories about her work and plans for her future. She had been accepted to graduate school for social work, with intentions to specialize in family therapy and trauma recovery. "I want to do here what I've been doing in Ireland," she explained over dinner at my apartment. "Help families find their way back to each other. Help people turn their pain into something useful." She had also brought news about Sandra, whom she had been in contact with throughout her time abroad. "Mom's doing really well," Maya said carefully, watching both Michael's and my reactions. "She's been going to therapy, working 2 jobs, taking computer classes at night. She asked me to tell you both that she thinks about you often and hopes you're doing well." It was a typically Maya gesture, maintaining connections with everyone who mattered to her regardless of the complications involved. "I'm glad she's doing better," I said, and meant it. "It takes courage to rebuild your life after losing everything." "She wants to apologize again," Maya continued, "but she doesn't want to intrude on the peace you've all found. She said to tell you that she understands if you never want to see her again, but she hopes someday you might be willing to be civil if you run into each other." I considered this message, thinking about the woman who had betrayed my trust so completely, but who had also taken responsibility for her actions and made restitution to the best of her ability. "If I see her, I'll be civil," I said finally, "but I'm not ready for anything more than that." Michael nodded his agreement, and Maya seemed satisfied that we weren't rejecting the possibility entirely. The summer of Maya's return was filled with family activities that would have seemed impossible a few years earlier. We went to baseball games and museums, had picnics in Central Park, took day trips to Long Island beaches. Not constantly, but regularly, as if we were a normal family that enjoyed spending time together. Because, I realized, that's what we had become. Normal wasn't the same as perfect, but it was infinitely better than broken. Maya's graduation from college that fall was a celebration of everything she had accomplished, both academically and personally. She had maintained excellent grades while doing meaningful work, had grown into a confident young woman with clear goals and strong values. All 3 of us were there, Michael and Sandra and I, sitting in different sections of the graduation venue, but united in our pride for this remarkable young woman. Sandra had flown in from Connecticut for the occasion, looking healthier and more stable than I had seen her in years. We didn't speak during the ceremony, but we nodded politely when our eyes met, acknowledging each other's presence without drama or hostility. It felt like progress. After the ceremony, as families gathered for pictures and celebrations, Maya insisted on photos with everyone, group shots and individual portraits, capturing this milestone with all the people who had shaped her life. "I want pictures with my whole family," she said firmly, when someone suggested that Sandra should wait her turn. "Everyone who loves me belongs in these pictures." So we took pictures together, all of us, smiling for the camera while Maya beamed between us. In the photos, we looked like what we were, a family that had been through difficult times but had found their way back to love. As we prepared to part ways after the celebration, Sandra approached me hesitantly, her expression nervous but determined. "Eleanor, I wanted to thank you for not making this day difficult," she said quietly. "You could have made things awkward and you chose not to. That means a lot to me." "This day is about Maya," I replied simply. "She deserves to celebrate with everyone who loves her." Sandra nodded gratefully, then hesitated as if she wanted to say more but wasn't sure if she should. "Is there something else?" I asked. "I just wanted you to know that what I did to you, it changed me. Not just the consequences, but the realization of what I was capable of when I was desperate. I never want to be that person again." I looked at her, this woman who had once been my daughter-in-law, who had given me my granddaughter, who had betrayed me so completely. In her face, I saw genuine remorse and what appeared to be hard-won wisdom. "I believe you," I said, and realized I actually did. We didn't hug or make promises about future contact, but we parted on a note of mutual respect that would have seemed impossible during the darkest days of our conflict. That evening, as I sat in my apartment looking at the pictures from Maya's graduation, I reflected on the journey that had brought us all to this point. 3 years ago, I had been a woman whose family was stealing from her, who felt used and abandoned and utterly alone. Today, I was surrounded by people who loved me, respected me, and valued my presence in their lives. The transformation hadn't been easy or linear. There had been setbacks and painful conversations, legal battles and emotional earthquakes. But there had also been growth and forgiveness, understanding and eventual peace. I thought about Frank, about what he would think of how everything had turned out. I imagined him smiling at Maya's success, proud of her commitment to helping others heal from family trauma. I imagined him pleased that Michael and I had found our way back to each other, that our family had survived its crisis and emerged stronger. Most of all, I imagined him proud of me for refusing to be a victim, for fighting back when I was betrayed, for choosing forgiveness when it was possible and boundaries when it was necessary. As I prepared for bed that night, I felt something I hadn't experienced since Frank's death: complete satisfaction with my life. Not because it was perfect, but because it was authentically mine, shaped by my choices and values rather than other people's expectations or demands. I had learned that love doesn't require self-sacrifice, that generosity shouldn't come at the expense of self-respect. That family is something you build through actions rather than something you're simply born into. Most importantly, I had learned that it's never too late to start over, to set boundaries, to demand the respect you deserve. Age brings wisdom, and sometimes that wisdom requires us to radically restructure our relationships and expectations. The woman who found that forged will in her daughter-in-law's laptop was not the same woman who fell asleep peacefully in Queens that night, surrounded by pictures of her granddaughter's graduation and filled with hope for the future. That woman had been broken by betrayal. This woman had been rebuilt by the experience of standing up for herself and discovering that she was stronger than she had ever imagined. As I drifted off to sleep, I thought about all the other people like me, the elderly parents and grandparents who give and give until there's nothing left, who tolerate disrespect and exploitation because they fear abandonment more than abuse. I wanted to tell them what I had learned, that you can survive losing people who don't value you, that respect is not negotiable, that love should never come with a price tag attached. I wanted to tell them that it's never too late to discover your own worth, to set boundaries, to build a life that reflects your values rather than other people's demands. I wanted to tell them that sometimes the most loving thing you can do is to stop enabling bad behavior, even when, especially when, that behavior comes from family. But mostly, I wanted to tell them that there is life after betrayal, peace after conflict, and joy after heartbreak, if you're willing to do the hard work of rebuilding yourself and your relationships on a foundation of mutual respect rather than obligation and guilt. The woman I am today would never have tolerated what the woman I was 3 years ago accepted as normal. That transformation wasn't easy, but it saved my life, my dignity, and ultimately, my family. And that's a story worth sharing, a lesson worth learning, a victory worth celebrating. Now, as I finish telling you this story, I want to ask you something. Have you ever lived through something like this? Have you watched someone you love sacrifice their dignity for people who didn't deserve it? Have you found yourself giving until there was nothing left, hoping to purchase love with your generosity? Please share your story in the comments below. And if this story has touched something in your heart, if it's reminded you that you deserve respect and genuine love, please like this video and subscribe to this channel. Your support helps me continue sharing these stories, and maybe, just maybe, they'll reach someone who needs to hear that they're not alone, that it's never too late to stand up for themselves, and that there is hope on the other side of betrayal. Thank you for listening to my story. Thank you for caring enough to hear it all the way through. And remember, you are worth more than you know, stronger than you think, and deserving of love that doesn't come with conditions attached.